Hey there, and welcome back if you've been with us before. If you haven't been with us, welcome. In this video, we're going to be talking about panoramic photographs and how to manipulate your photos to create a panoramic photo in Photoshop. So not all cameras have the ability to take panoramic photos all in one swipe, where you just move your camera from left to right or right to left, and it takes just one big long photo. You have to take multiple photos um, on your own from left to right or right to left. And actually, Photoshop does such a great job in this that you don't have to take them left to right or right to left. You can take a photo in the middle and then go a photo on the right and a photo on the left, and it will put it all together. It is just that awesome. So today we're going to be talking about how to do that in Photoshop. Let's get started. Okay, so before we dive right into actually making a photograph, I'm going to talk about a little bit of how this process actually happens. So I'm going to draw a very rude, crude, whatever example here in Photoshop. So if I have three photos, and I don't have to take them in any particular order, so you don't have to take them from left to right or right to left in order to get the panoramic. You can take the center photo first, the left or the right photo second, and the left photo last. Photoshop does not examine your photos in a 1, 2, 3 order. It examines the information of what's in the photo, and it will match the the information between the photos and overlay them. So in this example, as you can see, we have three different photos, and the part where I have colored in is Photoshop blending the matching information of those photos to show or to tell in what order those photos need to come, and it matches them up and overlays them. And so if you think about it, this is even broader than just panoramic. So let's say, NASA has these huge, like, poster-sized photos of the Earth or some galaxy or whatever. They don't take one massive photograph because that would just, I mean, they would need one massive camera to do that. So they take a bunch of little tiny individual photographs of whatever they're examining, and then they stick them into a program. Might be Adobe Photoshop, might be something else that's like way more advanced. I don't know. But they stick them into a program, and it does essentially what Photoshop is doing. It examines the edges of that photograph, and it puts those hundreds or thousands of tiny little photographs and analyzes all of the information, the visual components of the photos, matches them together, overlays, and blends them so that they can have thousands of tiny photographs turn into one massive, impressive, very detailed photograph. So that's on a large scale. Let's just look on a very small scale and put together a three-photoed panoramic photograph. This is actually a fairly simple process in which Photoshop does pretty much all of the work. So first we're going to close this very ugly visual example, and we're not going to save it. And we're going to go up to File, down to Automate, and then we're going to go to the last option of Photo Merge. And then we're going to get this pop-up dialog box. And on the left-hand side, it's going to have options as far as the visual component of how the photos are put together. So the auto is, Photoshop is just going to automatically stretch or position the photograph based on what it is analyzing or what it has analyzed and what it thinks is there. The next option is perspective, which is going to just basically give a straight line, hopefully. The other one is a cylindrical. So if you want kind of a fisheye view, then you have spherical. So if you want the edges rounded, and then you have collage. So if it's like, you want a panoramic view, but you want one part to be like the main focus. So you have the center, you can make the center photo or center part just a little bit bigger than the outside portions, and it puts them together as if you have three photos just basically stacked on one another. And then reposition, which I believe is it's just, you know, repositioning the photos. I haven't really played a lot with panoramics, especially that reposition option. So I'm not too familiar with that. Okay, and then you also have other options down below the that big blank space in there, which is where the file names will be added. You'll see that in a second. You have blend images together. That is always automatically checked because Photoshop is essentially blending those images together. If you uncheck that, then you're going to have, instead of Photoshop overlaying the images so you have one smooth transition from one image to another, it's just going to put them end to end, and you're going to get a weird kind of wonky line where you can tell where each photograph was its own individual photograph. And then you have vignette removal. So if your photos have kind of that black um, outside, I guess you will, darkening, it's going to remove that. Geometric distortion correction. So if there's a little bit of a warping to your photograph, or it's a little distorted, Photoshop might try to correct that for you. And then content aware fill, transparent areas. We will look at that one, and I will show you the difference of that. So we'll actually talk about that one in a few in a little bit. That's easier to understand if you actually see it. Okay, so now you have your options over on the right side to browse, remove, and add open files. So right now we don't have any photos chosen to be or to use. So we're going to hit browse and then find our photos and select them and open them, and then they will go into the dialog box. You will see in just a second for us to use. Now, let's say you want to use the file that you have open already. So if I wanted to include that flower file that I have in the background there that we are not doing anything with at this moment, but if I wanted to use that in addition to my other files that we will be opening in a second, I would click that to add the open file to the list of photos to merge together. Okay, so now that all of that is explained, let's go ahead and open our files. Okay, and because I have not chosen any files yet, I'm going to go ahead and hit Browse on that dialog box, and it brings up my file management window. And I already have a folder that says Photo Merge, and I have only 3 photos that I'm going to use. You may have a folder that has multiple photos and they're not listed in consecutive order. If that is the case, then if you are on a Mac, you're going to hold down the Command key on your keyboard and then click on each one of those photos that you would like to use, and it will highlight those photos by themselves for you to open. If you are on a PC, you will do the same thing, only you'll use the Control key. And if they're in consecutive order, you can just click and drag and select all 3 of them. Okay, and then once you have your photos selected, go ahead and click OK. And then you can see the photos that you're going to use listed in that dialog box. And if you want to add open files, you can, but we're not going to in this example. So we clicked OK. And on the right-hand side in the Layers panel, you can see Photoshop working its magic. And voila, we have 3 pictures that were stitched and blended together that weren't in any particular order, I do not believe. And Photoshop did it. We had the automatic option as far as how they're going to be put together chosen, and it automatically did the perspective view from what it looks like. That's what I think it did. And then as you can see, there are blank spaces here, and that's because Photoshop stitched and warped the individual images in order to match them and make them align appropriately so it looks like one large picture. To get rid of those blank spaces, you can either crop them out from here, or you could have chosen the content fill aware option in that dialog box before hitting OK. And I'll go back and show you how to do that, and you can see the difference it makes. But first, I want to point out that if you look in your layers panel, you will see that each individual image has a layer mask on it. That is how Photoshop is able to very seamlessly, meaning without an obvious line in your photographs, it's able to seamlessly put together those three photographs to make it so that it looks like one big one instead of three individual ones just put right up next to each other. So without those masks, you would have lines going down where each of the three photos met side by side. Center, the mask gradually gets more opaque to let certain things come through, and as the photos are overlaying on top of each other. So masks are very useful. And right now with the zoomed out to see everything all in one, let's call this the bird's eye view, if you will. This actually looks pretty good. I'm not really seeing a seam or an obvious spot where the photos were put together or blended other than the little jagged edges. So let's go ahead and actually zoom in and take a closer look to see, because you know there's buildings in there. So are the buildings actually blended and aligned really well, or is like one of those buildings kind of looking like they had a little earthquake and is sitting on a fault line? So let's zoom in and look. And actually, a quick look, those buildings all look really good. They look like they were blended very well together. And I'm not seeing any obvious things in the sky. So I would expect that some of those buildings would have looked like half of it fell off. But Photoshop did actually a really good job at blending these photos together. So let's go ahead and flatten the image, which is going to make editing from here a lot simpler. And I'm going to crop out those transparent areas. So that's a fairly decent panoramic view, I guess. But we're going to close this. I'm not going to save anything. And then we're going to start over so that we can utilize the content fill or content aware fill function that is offered in this process so that we can maybe get a better compositioned panoramic photograph. So we're again going to go to File, Automate, and then Photo Merge. And then we're going to get our pop-up box. And I'm just going to go ahead and leave our option for the layout as auto. And then I'm going to browse again and select my photographs. Click OK. The photos that I selected are listed in the dialog box, so perfect. I'm not going to add any open files, so I'm okay there. So the only other thing that I'm going to do before I click OK is choose the content aware fill transparent areas down at the bottom of the dialog box. And this is going to get rid of those blank areas in the result. Okay, so I clicked OK. Photoshop's doing its thing, thinking and thinking. And because we did the content fill aware, it's going to take a little bit longer than the first time. And bam! Oh, isn't that awesome? Okay, so the white on the corners and the outside edges, that's there just because I have my crop tool activated. But the dotted line, that is the surrounding edge of the actual panoramic put together photograph versus, so you can tell what part of the photograph was filled in versus what part of the photograph is the actual stitched and blended together photo. And over in the layers panel, you'll see that you have each individual photo with its layer mask, as well as the whole thing, if you will. And that's just the whole thing is um, that's with the fill area. So if I toggle the visibility by clicking on that eye, you will see what's been filled in and what the final result will be. If you were going to go ahead and print this photograph. So, however, before you print this photograph or print your photograph, you would have to flatten the image to get rid of those layer masks so that you can export or send the photo to the printer in a JPEG format because right now it's in a PSD format, which is a Photoshop file. And if you were to save it into a TIFF file, TIFF, not all printers accept those. So what you're going to do is go to the layer option in your menu bar and go down to flatten image. And that's going to take all of your layers in your layer panel and make them into one. So when you do this, make sure, first of all, I didn't do this. Make sure, first of all, that that top layer that has the transparent areas filled in is visible. So it has little eye on to the left of the thumbnail image. And then that layer is the one that is selected because it's going to flatten from the active layer down. And once you have flattened the image, not only can you send it to the printer and export it as a JPEG much easier, but if you're going to do any edits at all, such as enhancing the blue in the sky, taking out the yellow in the buildings so that you have white buildings, changing any contrasts or basically any edit at all. By flattening the image, you will be able to edit the image much easier because you will be editing one complete image versus if you were to edit the image before flattening, you would have to edit each individual layer and try to do it the same exact way so that you don't have one side of the sky super blue and the other side of the sky just a little bit of a different blue, or some of the buildings are yellow, some of the buildings are like an off-white. That would be a pretty drastic, like obvious thing. But anyway, by flattening the image, you can edit the image as a whole instead of in three individual layers. I hope that makes sense. So once you're done, make sure all your layers are active. Your very top layer is active and selected, and then flatten the image, and that will allow for much easier editing as well as easier exporting to a file format that you can print.